Good morning, everyone. I welcome you to the Thursday, July 18th, 2024 Public Works Committee meeting. And with us today, we have Councilmember Angela Jefferson, Councilmember Michael Althauser, and myself, Councilmember Swarthout. First order of business is the approval of the minutes from the Public Works Committee meeting of June 6, 2024. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
I second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right. Okay, and then we did receive an email that item number, let's see, which one is it there? Oh, we have this is the current one. So there was an item that was taken off the agenda for discussion later. So we will start today with the lot Deschutes Valley Properties Purchase Update. And take it away, Dan.
Okay, good morning. I apologize for the background. I am having a million technical difficulties this morning, so I hope you are able to see my presentation. Despite that, I don't share the common background with y'all, but let me see if I can get this rolling here. Let's see here. And I have to not find Zoom again. Zoom, share screen. You'd think you'd be on top of this.
Yeah,
now.
right.
You know,
It's only been how many years we've been doing
I know,
Zoom,
right? So apologies.
No worries, just kidding. So
Okay, you can see that, but now I can't. Okay, can you see the whole screen now without anything of the extraneous other things?
yes, Dan.
All right, perfect, fantastic. So welcome and good morning, and yep, I'm here to talk to you this morning about the Deschutes River Valley feasibility report. You probably last heard we came to you, I think, late last year with a memorandum of understanding between us and the Lot Clean Water Alliance relating to some properties they have down in the Deschutes Valley. In addition to some other properties that are still under evaluation off of Henderson Boulevard. But this one is specifically about these properties that you see here on the right-hand side, down the Brewery Valley floor, just north of the golf course. As you're likely aware, these properties were acquired by the Lot Clean Water Alliance and back in 2011, so just over 10 years ago, for reclaimed water production by Lot. And that would have been, quote unquote, Tumwater's reclaimed water satellite plant. And that would have been produced there and delivered to the city. Over the last 12 years or so, 13 years or so, Lot has made some efficiencies and some improvements in their other facilities, both at the Hawks Prairie, Martin Way treatment plant, as well as the downtown Bud Inlet treatment plant that basically negates the need for an additional reclaimed water plant in Tumwater utilizing these properties. So they did some capital planning. They recognized that they really didn't need these properties anymore and started having conversations with the city to for potential purchase if it was in the city's interest. Since that time, I believe earlier this year, Lot has declared those properties surplus, and we are in kind of the process of determining or negotiating with Lot. We have a couple of steps to get to, and I'll get there momentarily. But before we got to that place with Lot to determine that these made sense for us, we hired SCJ Alliance to evaluate these properties based on a handful of goals. If you've been around long enough, you were part of the Brewery District Plan development way back in I want to say about 12 years ago. That plan was put together. There was a number of goals identified in that plan for the brewery area, the Custer Way, Cleveland Avenue area. So that was evaluated, as well as the three primary goals that we looked at, or four primary goals we really kind of looked at as far as transportation, the East Street Connector Project, habitat enhancement along the Deschutes River, parks and recreation from trails, rafting, outdoor recreation opportunities, as well as opportunities with other stakeholders, and then ultimately parking for events. As you know, July 4th, which we just passed, Brewfest, which is coming. Those are some of the city's major events, and parking at the brewery is essential, as parking doesn't really exist elsewhere in that immediate vicinity. So again, we're looking at these three parcels. They're about a total of 44.81 acres. There are a handful of buildings on what we call the east parcel. Unfortunately, the analysis those buildings aren't really turnkey for any types of uses. They are just basically structures. They're not necessarily in horrible shape, but for any types of end use, there would be significant investments involved. So we'll get to that a little bit later if there are questions. But the end result is those buildings are not necessarily functional without some significant work, but they are not necessarily also in bad shape. The current total price for the 44.8 acres is on light industrial, $3.9 million. As SCJ went through their analysis, they considered land use consideration, the physical environmental characteristics, what kind of work would necessarily be needed if development was to be considered down in here, so constructability issues. They looked at the market demand, who might be interested, what might be interested through these properties, financial viability, and then ultimately are there any other regulatory considerations or constraints that the city would want to take into account in purchasing these properties. So the first kind of primary big major goal the city looked at was, does this help us further the East Street Connector project? And how does that connect up basically with the Brewery District Plan? The Brewery District Plan identified that this East Street Connector, and the acquisition of these properties would therefore support 4 of the primary project goals and 22 of the supporting objectives in that original plan. So basically, through direct and indirect benefits, primarily around the transportation, the economic opportunities, by creating this connection between both streets, between Cleveland Avenue and Capitol Boulevard, and creating a stronger sense of place for all of Tumwater residents and businesses that are in that brewery district area. As you're aware, this would reroute traffic away from North Street. A lot of traffic there creates pedestrian-friendly development. Folks could be able to walk through these areas and visit the various parks and other activities that they have there. And this provides access to the east side of the Deschutes Valley. And ultimately, to make the brewery or the East Street Connector project work, additional right-of-way is necessary for the city to purchase. So these properties do serve to support in a very strong way the goals of that Brewery District Plan. As I mentioned, design alternative, assume the original design alternatives assume that there would be a lot plant here, so that might provide us some additional flexibility as the city moves forward with consideration of this type of a project. Is there is the alignment accurate? Can something be done differently now that the plant is not anticipated to be there? In 2024 dollars, this is about $50 to $52 million. I think the original plan had somewhere a little bit less than that, but still a very significant investment for city as a city project to make this East Street Connector work. They conceptualized what would have to happen to make sure that pedestrians could also move across through this area as is intended through the Brewery District Plan, and recognizing that about $190,000 you'd have to create kind of a stairs up to a kind of a walk pathway over that bridge or over a bridge where this East Street Connector would be moving vehicles. So there would be a sidewalk and pedestrian friendly access as well through there. One thing, let's see if I can get my highlighter to work. What they have here is listed as a lot access road. There are different configurations in the plan and ideas to be considered as far as how moving vehicles from one side to the other also allows vehicles to kind of get down into this area, because once that East Street connection, you can see it a little bit later in another image I have for you, it kind of does away with that existing bridge and puts a new one here sufficient for the traffic load that would be there. This shows craft district construction underway. As you know, that's complete. This is an old image here. The Tumwater Valley Drive realignment, I believe, is open now. So that's a neat little change there if you haven't driven down that way yet. And so the rest of these things are conceptualized. And this is, again, very conceptual. This is, I think, from the old plan that's been modified to recognize some things that can happen. However, there is still in future plans an idea of how to get vehicles down over here to the east side. And I'll show you why that'll be important in the future.
Dan, can I ask a question before you go?
Absolutely.
Before we jog on, for the valuation of these properties, like the railroad is obviously like a big challenge, right? That's partially why the East Street Bridge, it makes sense to have it elevated because we're not able to just get that right of way because of the railroad. Does that, like the valuation of $3.9 million, does that factor in the accessibility challenges resulting from the railroad? Like, it seems like those properties towards the back, you would either have to invest in this very expensive road, which is also very critical for the future. I'm not challenging that expensive means bad, but you know, that would be, that is a very expensive project in order to create access. It almost seems like those properties, just the value of those just sort of seems so questionable because you'd have to spend tens of millions of dollars to actually access them meaningfully, given the railroad.
Absolutely.
Is that taken into account in the valuation?
Absolutely. Yeah. And you just really touched on two of the three major constraints or challenges with marketing and development of these parcels. You know, by you know, any third party that might be interested in these things. So we'll actually get there in a little bit. But yes, all of those factors that I mentioned earlier, land use characteristics, the environmental, physical constraints, challenges, regulatory situations, all of those things I had mentioned on that first slide, those were all considered in through those valuations as well.
And the third one is the flood. That's a flood.
That would be the third one, correct.
All right. Sorry, I
Dan,
didn't jump ahead.
Yeah, no worries.
and Dan, can you clarify? I don't believe that was an actual appraisal.
Yes, we actually had an appraisal by Anderson.
Okay, okay, thank you for that. And well, I'm not gonna jump in because I'm assuming you're gonna talk about the phase one environmental request to ecology.
That'll be
Okay.
basically the fourth
Okay.
challenge. Yeah. And so, you know, so the third or the second kind of primary major goal for the city was to ensure that, you know, in some level, you know, if we were to acquire these properties, you know, could we have parking, you know, to help support the major events that we have down there, again, July 4th, Brewfest, Night on the Green. I mean, all the various things that the park or the golf and the Parks Department does cats does for our community throughout time. So what we really looked at here, I have still my screen, I do. We kind of looked at both sides. These two parcels are the two primary parcels that can support parking here. The west side parcels we'll get to in a moment is really one that we're looking at from a potential for habitat restoration in Deschutes River and meeting another a bunch of environmental and regulatory concerns there as well. And so looked at the could we get the 1,500 stalls, which is the kind of the metric that we use to say, you know, that's the amount of parking we would need. Could we get that on the west side as well? And the reality is there's a number of options on the using both the west and the east. You know, and the concern was, can we get all 1,500 on the east side? Yeah, it's a little tighter, but things could be done there. And this is how they demonstrated how that would work. On this image is where you can see the East Street extension. Again, just conceptual design to see, you know, could these things work, you know, from city's perspective. None of this has been designed to any kind of 30% or even 5% engineering. This is just something we kind of put on paper to say, hey, could we make this thing potentially work out as we look into the future efforts of a project like this. But you can't really see it here, but basically, or you see it kind of right here. This is where that road kind of comes off, and you guys are over my image there. So we'll be over there, but you can kind of see how we would anticipate getting access here. And as Councilmember Swarthout or Althauser pointed out, access in particular to these parcels is very challenging. There is, and I think I get to it a little bit farther on, or talk about it here with negotiate Boston Street access. There is a north access, we call it, coming down this way. And currently that would require an easement with Tumwater Development LLC. So, you know, one of the considerations we would have to look at is not only can we negotiate access through an easement, but what kind of improvements would be necessary for that, you know, for appropriate access for the public to be able to reach this west parcel as well as the east parcel, because accurately Union Pacific Railroad runs right through the middle of this parcel, and they do not allow for public vehicular access across that. So one of the other presents that significant challenge for the city is if we were to acquire these parcels, how can we ensure some level of access across this? It might be an easier negotiation for the city itself for own city needs. However, the East Street extension would be the appropriate way we get primarily public vehicular traffic through there.
Dan, I have a quick.
Yes.
So the Tumwater Development LLC, that's clear up, they have access clear up at the top by Boston. Is that the people that develop the craft district?
No.
Oh, okay.
Let's see, what else did I say over here? Event parking requires use of Boston Street. That's the north access, and to negotiate that street access with Tumwater Development up there would be one of the primary considerations for any of this work here with parking. Primary message of the city was we can get the parking that we need, through the acquisition of these two parcels, as well as the right of way for the East Street connector. So 4 of our major considerations, or 3 of our major considerations anyway, were applicable, and kind of put the city in the direction of negotiations with lot. The third one, habitat restoration. As I mentioned earlier, there's a number of regulatory considerations, the total maximum daily load, the stormwater permit that the city manages, for all of the stormwater runoff and surface water quality in our community. There are a number of projects that are being considered by the city that have wetland impacts. And we know now we have coho and Chinook salmon both in the Deschutes River. While they might not have been a native run for either of those species, they do exist within the system. That was confirmed through some of the outfall stormwater work that we've been doing through eDNA, very similar to what we've done in other areas of the city to determine presence or absence of some of these species to basically further and rank in priority for stormwater mitigation projects and culvert mitigation projects. So, we know those fish live there. We know we have some projects, including the Tumwater Valley Regional Stormwater Facility, the M Street outfall, aka the M Street outfall, the East Linwood outfall. Would be utilizing properties just south of East Street on properties owned by the city. All of those have some challenges that we would need to mitigate for those impacts through wetland and riparian restoration. We've also recently applied for a grant, a large watershed.
Did anyone else lose sound?
Basically, restoration grant through Floodplains by Design. And some of those projects would basically help address this. What you see here is right here, they're showing 150-foot buffer. Ideally, there are areas where we can get up to a 250-foot buffer. That would be sufficient to meet some of the mitigation needs for the city. Also, for other projects that, Parks Department is working on, the trail, there are some other challenges. And so it might also create a opportunity for us to put together a quote unquote mitigation bank. It might be more of a mitigation bank just for city needs, not necessarily for regional needs. But it helps get us there. Also sets us up for floodplain storage, some floodplain storage benefits. We talked about some of the challenges there with development of these properties. The floodplain storage is one of those challenges. Soils could be moved through these areas to provide for some additional floodplain storage, mitigate for some of those impacts, provide for some of the parking and some of the other development needs that the city has, the East Street connector, et cetera. And then also riparian area and habitat restoration efforts. So we can achieve basically some of our goals around habitat restoration, to help, achieve that goal by removing impervious surface, planting native species in the area, doing some soil amendments, and creating a functional riparian buffer on the west side or the east side of the river there. Of course, when we're looking at mitigation bank or any type of mitigation for those properties, it's a long process that requires agency approval, both state and generally federal approval for that mitigation. So that would be a long process, providing the city a lot of time to kind of determine how the East Street connector and the parking projects move forward. And underneath this sign, you can see where we are looking at options to get parking on both sides, even in conjunction with some of the habitat restoration work too. So a lot of feasibility work's gone into this so far, just to determine whether or not the city's needs could get met. But as we talked about before, there are a lot of considerations or a lot of concerns. This is an industrial land use, so the primary concern for any kind of subsurface work or development work is what kind of contamination is identified there. Lots done 2 phase ones, one in 2011 when they were purchasing the property. Some areas of concern were identified. They updated that, I believe, in 2013. I would also like to say they have done a lot of work in the meantime to kind of address some of those areas of concerns with the buildings. They've taken some materials down. They've removed some other stuff. They haven't done phase 2, and they haven't done any work that's subgrade, so to speak. And so there's been no subsurface evaluation of soils. And so probably one of our first steps, and I'm probably getting ahead of myself, is to update that phase 1 and kind of reevaluate, the work that's been completed by lot. That would help inform what a phase 2 might look like if the city would want to invest in that prior to or as part of acquisition of these properties. So that is a big kind of questionable unknown out there. The access is also a questionable unknown. What would Union Pacific Railroad allow for the city to have to cross that crossing? As you know, not only do we have a public interest in utilizing or crossing that railroad for these types of projects here, we also have the Brewery Wellfield, which we are beginning efforts on that project as well. That has some crossing needs because this will be developed on properties just on the other side of the railroad, accessing wells that could be drilled on on the east side of the railroad. So there are still needs for the city to be able to access and go and utilize that. However, if the city buys this property, the existing agreement that lot has to cross Union Pacific Railroad for its needs, that goes away upon that resale. So renegotiations are necessary. On the bright side, we actually have a project and a contact coming down next week. I learned yesterday to address some other concerns that we have with stormwater runoff, and we are going to get some additional contacts to have this conversation in coming months, with them as well. So that was just kind of a nice blend that meshed this week. Development options are consistent with zoning and the Brewery District Plan as it's zoned, and so things can happen down there. However, it's also a 100-year floodplain that's going to limit, what kind of development can happen there. Any development that would potentially consider down there would have to, be resistant, so to speak, to flooding, because as we talked about, I think late 2002 or early 2003. Mitigation for those floodwaters and development down in these properties in these areas, starts at $2 million, goes up to $8 million, depending on the level of flood you can tolerate for any kind of development there. And that's in addition to whatever your permitting and site development costs would be for physical infrastructure there, if you're considering any kind of substantial development in terms of, not a parking lot, so to speak, but anything more substantial where you're going to have facilities or buildings within that floodplain. And because of those, issues, because of the issues with the potential contamination and the access, this does really have limited commercial marketability. And considering that, for the public uses that have been identified here, it's looked at that public acquisition of these properties really is the highest and most beneficial use of those properties, especially since the city has some targeted needs that it could meet. From a site security standpoint, these properties in particular that are owned by lot, they're well secured. They're not really a frequent target for vandalism, likely because of the work lot has done already to kind of free and clear those buildings out with things. Security currently is managed and funded by Tumwater Development LLC. If the city was considering something separate or additional to Tumwater Development LLC, it could range anywhere from $25,000 to $60,000 a year, based on whatever level of security we would want. However, it's recommended that the city really kind of negotiate with Development LLC, as does lot, to integrate their site. There's really not a whole heck of a lot, like I mentioned, and those buildings aren't really high targets, so it's not necessarily a major concern for Tumwater Development. They're able to integrate that. Maintenance, the structures require minimal care. The biggest impact out there would be the care of the site vegetation and removal of any debris that they're doing out there. And that's, you know, substantive in terms of, you know, if, you know, how does the city want to maintain those parcels? And that would be the probably the greatest expense in terms of overall maintenance of these sites if we were to acquire them as they live today. So, you know, what does it look like if the city was to acquire this? There are some, you know, there are needs that meet that different funds. We have both stormwater and general fund. And so, you know, if we're looking at, you know, general fund being for parks and transportation in those senses, you know, so what does that funding formula look like? Like, how do we move forward considering how much either pay? What does the hazard challenges look like, you know, as we get through an updated phase 1 and consider a phase 2 effort to determine the overall challenges down there? You know, is there some way you know, how does that affect the overall purchase price that we have with lot? You know, there's been conversation around how we mitigate some of those needs, and so those I anticipate would continue. Again, no real conversations have happened to determine what that looks like yet. We want to kind of get through this first phase 1 update where we have actually we're talking with Ecology to kind of figure out what that looks like for us to do an update of phase 1 for this year, or finishing up early part of next year. And then also including, you know, the ongoing maintenance needs out there for us as well. You know, what does that look like? So all of those pieces would go into that funding formula picture, you know, for the city to ultimately make an offer to lot. And of course, before that happens, we would come back to city council and kind of go over what we have found in the phase 1, potentially phase 2, the conversations with Union Pacific Railroad, and continuations with a survey and an also report. Some of those additional conversations that we do over the next few months, probably to a year. Our agreement with the MOU that we have with Lot to kind of make an offer has been extended out to the end of this year. Lot is flexible and a valued and good partner on this project, obviously, and they are an extension of us as well and are very willing to work with us. So they are basically standing by our side as we walk through these various pieces here, updating that phase 1, determining scope and need for phase 2, discussions with Union Pacific. They do have some contacts. However, really the city needs to have that conversation with them, Union Pacific Railroad, to make sure that our needs can be met. And then, you know, then we start having those conversations. Once all these pieces can be on the table, we can have those conversations with Lot to determine what that overall purchase price looks like, what funding looks like. You know, is this something that we can do over time? Is it a singular point of purchase? You know, et cetera. I anticipate that we'll be coming back to you at some point this year, probably later this year, before the expiration of the MOU, to either update you as to our status of all of our findings, or ask you for an extension on that MOU. And if we did that, obviously Lot would be on board with that extension as well, to give us some more time to come up with the pieces that we need to move forward with that. But the short story is, these properties are in the city's interest to acquire. They do help the city further a number of its goals. And we are interested in then moving to these next steps that you see here, ultimately to come up with an offer price for Lot to acquire these, if these phase 1s and phase 2s and the discussions pan themselves out as well. So with that, I think that's the last of my slides, and I just wanted to kind of highlight the parcels that the city owns now for wellfield development are here, and we do have a need to be able to cross the railroad, and, you know, at least at one point here, because we also own this parcel here, which has a number of well houses on it as well. So you can see that having this piece as well contiguous for those pieces as well helps serve that project in itself as well too. So lots of good connection here. And with that, any last questions you have?
I have a question. So for the railroad, we'd have to renegotiate it. Essentially, we have an easement to cross the railroad at certain timelines, like for parking for Brewfest, we can do it then.
We don't. Lot has the current easement.
Right.
I think and the way Parks Chuck has described it to me, they allow us to cross it one time a year, and that's July 4th, and that's only because they don't operate on July 4th. So there's no operational concerns for Union Pacific on that day. Any other day, we are not allowed to cross that. There is no public use of that easement. Lot can use it for its own needs, but they can't authorize the city to access that during those times.
Okay. So for Brewfest, we really only use the parking on the left parcel,
Correct.
not the one on the right. Got it. So, I mean, this has always struck me as odd because there's a number of places in Thurston County where a railroad intersects a road and they have crossing beacons and the arms go up and down. And you see it up and down the coast as well, because I think Union Pacific runs up along the Puget Sound and there's regular crossings and traffic. Like, well, is there something special about this specific piece of railroad to where they
I
just
lost you.
are
I mean, it might
unwilling
be my internet, but I
to
can't
work with
hear
us on
you,
having like a beacon
Councilman
or an
Ballhauser.
arm that goes down and comes up? Like,
Might
would
be
it just
my
be
internet.
too much traffic? Like, I mean, this just seems commonplace, and the challenge that they impose of never letting us cross it just sort of seems out of step with what exists in other streets throughout, the entire state.
I would agree with you. My internet is apparently unstable, so I didn't get a lot of what you said there, but I think I got the gist of what you were saying. And in the conversations that I've had, not with Union Pacific, with just folks kind of adjacent to the conversation with them, it's just because of the nature of these properties, they haven't decided or ever came to a place that they would invest in any kind of real public crossing for that. And so we're never really interested in pursuing that as a project for them. But, that is something that we could, as we have this conversation, as we develop contacts and a relationship with them for our needs, understand better what that means. Because as you noted, yeah, they have crossings. I mean, just south of the golf course on Henderson Boulevard, it's that same traffic, the same rail line that, they've got that there too. So in the absence of something like that, there is an opportunity to hire their staff or some staff that they would contract out for crossing. It's very expensive, and it's really only for points in time, if there's a need for the city to do so. Beyond that, exactly what you're talking about, we would have to negotiate some kind of public some project to allow for public crossing with those kind of signals and those barriers to do that, to make it safe. But that would be part of our conversation. So we would ask that question, like, hey, what does that look like for them in our conversations?
Like, if that also helps make East Street more viable, if you can have an actual crossing of the railroad, like building an elevated road solely because we can't cross a railroad just seems like something that we should be able to find agreement on. I know there's other reasons because you have to go uphill on the other side of the valley,
right?
But this has always just confused me because there's crossings all over the place. But right. I understand that we don't own the property, so we're not the ones negotiating for that.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
Jared, did you have a comment?
Oh, I was just gonna chip in since I've had a little bit more communication with the railroad as of late. My understanding is that the railroad companies don't necessarily issue easements, but rather agreements for crossings at specific locations because they're more easily revocable, especially if the city has, especially if the railroad has work they need to do, increasing the bed maintenance capacity of the system. And as such, the railroad likes to keep those crossings in specified locations and not really increase the ones that they have already because it typically means impacts to the railroad itself. So that might be one of the reasons why the crossing is so limited in this location at the brewery, is it was the absolute minimum that they needed at the time and they didn't look at it again. So I was just going to add a little bit of information there.
That makes sense. It just seems like, I mean, I can count on one hand the number of times I've actually seen a train use it too.
Yeah.
Like it's this very infrequently used track. But I understand. And they also have, federal protections that we can't touch that were established in like the 1920s. And like, I understand it's very legally complicated. So I don't, not challenging that at all, but okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the point being is, we'll negotiate for what our needs are the best we can. And ultimately, yeah, we can't force the railroad into something they don't and are not going to do, or we can't eminent domain it, as the legal challenges and
Exactly.
with that too.
Yeah.
So, any other questions? All right. Well, that's all I had for you. So if something comes up for you, afterwards, let me know. And otherwise, I anticipate we'll be back sometime later this year with either a request for an extension or an update on what we found and a potential offer and conversation around that. So that's what I got. And have a great rest of your week and stay cool. And I think Jared's up next.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate that. And we're moving on to the Three Lakes Crossing Oversizing Agreement.
Thank you very much. While I go ahead and get that loaded up real quick. All right. Yeah, I was feeling bad this morning about my presentation having a lot of information in it, but after that one from Dan, I'm feeling pretty good about the overall length of my presentation. So I'll try and keep it short and sweet for you guys. All right, I'll go ahead and share my screen real quick. Okay, let me know if you guys can see that okay. All right, thank you very much.
We can see it.
Okay, so today I have for Public Works Committee, I'm presenting the water main oversizing agreement as part of the Three Lakes Crossing residential development. A little bit of background on the project. Three Lakes Crossing is a single-family home development off of Henderson Boulevard, just north of Tumwater Boulevard, if you're going sort of the back way to Olympia. The developer specifically was Copper Ridge LLC. They've done a couple of developments, not specifically in Tumwater, but in this greater Thurston area. Specifically, the project constructed a 16-inch diameter water main along its Henderson Boulevard frontage for the City of Tumwater water system plan. Typically, for residential development of this nature, an 8-inch diameter main would be the minimum amount required. Specifically, when the city water system plan requires or calls for a larger diameter water main, the developer may apply for what we call an oversizing agreement, which essentially reimburses them the cost between the minimum size main they would have normally been required to install and the larger size diameter main that the city water system plan calls for. The oversizing agreement is subject to funds being available. So this isn't necessarily something that we do all the time. We like to when we can, obviously. Those larger water mains that the city water system calls for are kind of what you would consider like a backbone system that supply better flow, water quality, fire protection throughout the city system. And it can be quite the feat for a lot of these projects to get those water mains installed. And it really is a benefit to the City of Tumwater when we do get those larger diameter water mains installed. So a little bit more on the project. This sort of red dashed area that I have here between existing Coyote Court on the west and Henderson Boulevard on the east is the project location. They are creating 45 new single-family homes, and also along with the water main that comes with storm drainage, sewer main, sidewalk connecting Henderson Boulevard and Coyote Court. So some really great pedestrian connectivity through there as well. And then along Henderson Boulevard, the dark blue line towards the northeast portion of the screen is the existing 16-inch water main that was installed several years ago by other various projects along Henderson Boulevard. The lighter blue line that you see towards the southeast section of the screen is the portion that Three Lakes Crossing installed, and it equates to about 244 linear feet of new 16-inch water main. So it was a pretty good run down Henderson Boulevard to get that water main in for them. So as far as the reimbursement element goes, we do the cost reimbursement is based off of the difference between the reported cost for installing the 16-inch water main versus a cost estimate for what the equivalent 8-inch water main, the minimum size, would have cost the project to install. The reported cost for the 16-inch water main was $81,920, and that was verified through a series of signed receipts, work orders, and whatnot from the contractor for the project. And then the professional engineer for the project submitted a cost estimate for what an 8-inch equivalent water main would have been to install, and then that cost is verified by staff here at the city of Tumwater to make sure it's accurate with current dollars in construction and what we would normally see with an 8-inch water main. That came in around $34,288. The reimbursement cost, or the amount that we would be giving back to the developer in the situation, would be $47,632. The reported cost was a little high in this instance based on what we would normally see. We kind of chalk that up to what I would say with the class of water main that they were using that requires a much thicker cross section on the pipe. The 16-inch water main is a pretty large one. Really above 16-inch, you're only seeing like an 18-inch and a 24-inch water main. So this is a really beefy pipe. You can move a lot of water of this. And when that system gets connected coming down Henderson Boulevard back into Tumwater Boulevard and the rest of the city water distribution system, it's really going to help fire protection, water quality, and water flow in this area. So it's one of those things that it costs a lot of money, and it's a very key piece of infrastructure that is slowly getting built by city projects and private development projects over time.
Can I ask a question about that? This
I
might
was just about to go ahead and ask your questions.
This might be a physics question, but if you have like an 8-inch water main, which is what the existing one is, I believe, right? North of it?
The existing water main of it is 16-inch actually as well.
Oh, so it's connecting 16 to 16? Oh,
Yep.
okay. I was gonna say, like, if you are connecting a smaller water main to a bigger one, do you actually increase the flow? Because you can only flow so much into that larger space. So
Right.
quickly.
No, your concept is definitely correct. Yeah, you would be limited to the flow capacity of the smaller water main. But luckily, yeah, we have 16-inch water main directly north of there that they were tying into. So we have good flow.
Cool. My other question, since we're at questions anyway, it seems I 34 you said seemed a little high. My assumption was just that it's 244 feet of larger main. Is that cost difference just the hard cost for the pipes? Like, it seems like there's all sorts of other costs involved in that. Like, you got to dig a bigger hole. It's heavier, so it probably requires more staff to move it and more equipment, like beefier equipment to move heavy pipes. Like when we put in water main, like, I don't know, I'm expecting, hundreds of thousands of dollars per 100 feet, like based on some of the other projects we've done. So is it just looking at the cost of pipe basically and not the labor and other things associated with that?
No, it does. That cost estimate does include the labor as well. So the depth of the water main, and as far as like the excavation for the 16-inch water main versus the 8-inch water main, isn't necessarily going to change. The material cost definitely is going to drive it up. There might be a little bit more time for them to a little bit more work labor time for them to install that 16-inch water main, just because of how heavy and how strong that pipe is, and a little bit more difficult to move around. But the construction means and methods for installing a 16-inch water main versus an 8-inch water main aren't vastly different. So that might explain why those costs are a little bit closer together or lesser than what you're seeing. Yeah.
Well, to get it to match what we already have on that street, that seems like a pretty good deal.
Yeah, I would agree. Yep. And, not to poke at the city process or anything, but there really is a lot to be said for private development, installing those utilities. A lot of times these contractors out there that are doing the private utility projects, they've got a good lead on material, and they've got good laborers and whatnot. This particular contract was very good to work with, especially through the right-of-way and the traffic control process on Henderson Boulevard. As I'm sure you are all very aware, that is a very, very, very busy road. And yes, while there were times, obviously, when traffic was impacted, the contractor did a very excellent job of mitigating that throughout the process.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So before I read the recommended action, are there any other questions?
I have a question. Let's see, I was looking at the contract. What's the timing of the reimbursement? I didn't see the dates there. When do we anticipate to reimburse the developer?
So I'll probably call on Dan Smith to help out with that, answering that question. But my understanding is that once, if Public Works Committee recommends acceptance of it, then we would go to City Council and it would be presented to them for approval. And then the agreement would be signed by the necessary authorities over here on the city side. And then the reimbursement would take place directly after that. Is that correct, Dan?
That's what would happen, right? So we would basically recommend or request that you authorize this for recommendation to City Council through the consent calendar. Once that gets approved there, it would come back to me the next day and we would process it through for approval for them. And then however long it would take to process through finance and get it out the door.
And what fund it'll be coming out of? It'll come out of
It'll be coming out of the water fund.
just the whole, okay.
The water fund, yeah. And we do plan for this, for this in our budgets, for both in the water and the sewer, funds for oversizing, for various actions. Cause this is one way we do meet the community's needs as developments move forward. Prior to them dedicating those facilities to us, we want to make sure that they do meet our needs as Jared had noted in there. So we do plan for this. We do have sufficient funds in our budget and, this is a good project to move forward.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, Jared.
Thank you very much, Dan. Yeah, and we had, I think Dan and I had been coordinating back and forth on this project for probably the better part of a year and a half. We identified that potential for the oversizing agreement relatively early on in the site plan review process, especially as a key piece of infrastructure for the city of Tumwater. That's something that we identify with the developer ahead of time. We track the costs, we get an approximation for it, and then as we move through the project, we really nailed down on that. So we've known about this one for a little while, and had really good, staff review and coordination on it. Okay, so if there are no additional questions at this time, I'll go ahead and read the recommended action. So staff requests that the Public Works Committee recommend City Council approve and authorize the Water Resources and Sustainability Director to sign the oversizing agreement with Copper Ridge LLC, which will reimburse the developer for installing a 16-inch water main.
So moved. I'd like to make that motion.
To
do we-
be clear, the
Yeah,
motion is
yeah,
that
do we
it
need
goes
to-
to the consent calendar. Is that correct, Angela? That's your recommendation.
yeah,
That's correct.
please, yeah.
Just to make sure we're clear for the minutes. So I'll second Angela's motion that we recommend approval and that it go on the consent calendar.
Okay, thank you for that, Michael. I was going to say, yeah, make sure that we have that clarification in there. All right, so we have a motion before us. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, all right. Nay, no one? All right, Jared, thank you so much. I appreciate the presentation and get this going for them.
Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good day.
You're muted.
Councilmember, I believe you're muted.
You're muted, Madam Chair.
Jeez, sorry. Okay, I'll figure out how to learn this. We have the small works contract for the Palermo security fence replacement project with West Coast Fence Pros LLC. I think it's one of the longest titles we've ever had, Steve. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Didn't know how best to explain it. Good morning, Madam Chair, committee members. I'll go ahead and start my presentation here. So I'm assuming everybody can see that.
Yep.
All right, so here to present a small works contract to Public Works Committee for consideration to replace and improve security fencing at the Palermo Drinking Water Production and Treatment Facility. The 2023-2024 budget included funding to improve security measures at drinking water facilities. These improvements, too far. These improvements included video surveillance monitoring and notification systems, as well as enhancing our key lock systems at those facilities to match current city standards, which is being implemented elsewhere in the city. This also includes security fencing improvements as well. So the Palermo well field is one of our primary water production treatment facilities, as you very well know. We've talked about it before. And so really the whole purpose of these projects is to make improvements that are focused on protecting and ensuring high quality drinking water supplied to our customers. The bids were solicited from 5 local fencing contractors from the MRC Small Works roster. 2 bids were received. The lowest bid was not responsive to the request for quotes and therefore was rejected. West Coast Fence Pros bid was responsive and selected with a total cost for this project at $162,631.32. Well, I'm going to be really quick today. Basically, for this project, this is replacing the existing security fencing around Palermo. We have more current fencing standards for protecting our drinking water facilities, and so this is improving this specific perimeter fence to those standards. So my recommendation for Public Works Committee staff is request the Public Works Committee approve and place on the Small Works contract for the Palermo Security Fence Replacement Project with West Coast Fence Pros LLC on the August 20, 2024 City Council consent calendar with a recommendation to approve and authorize the mayor to sign. And with that, I'll open up to questions. That was really quick. Was that too quick?
That was fast. So I do have a question. So right now the current fencing looks like it is what, 6 feet, and then does it have something to deter someone from climbing over? I was looking to see what the picture looked like. So what are we changing it to?
Yeah, so basically the older standards were just a standard 6-foot chain link fence with 3-strand barbed wire. Very simple, very common at most facilities, you know, commercial, private, city. The recommendations we received through our security assessments, we've received the recommendation for an 8-foot chain link fence that includes 3-strand barbed wire for a total height of 9 feet. It also includes a top tension wire instead of a rigid support beam, and also includes a concrete footer around the base to prevent tunneling.
Okay.
So more difficult to climb, extremely difficult to tunnel under. And this is the current standard that's been in place for some time now.
Mr. Craig, I also have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
So with increased security measures, do we also have motion sensors on the ground, and do we have video monitoring?
Yeah, so the funding that was approved this biennium was enhancing all of those systems. This is one piece of that for the fencing. We do have video surveillance now as part of this project, or not this specific project, but part of the funding was to add video surveillance, which also includes motion detection and alert notifications 24/7.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Steve. So I was going to jump in and say that, you know, this is also kind of is connected to, one component of the rate increase. The last time the city council had to take action, and we were increasing, water rates, in addition to adjustments for inflation and things along those lines. The city made an investment in improving security at all of our sites, and so this is one of the first major, well, I guess second, because we've done a number of other projects, smaller projects, but this is one of the larger security enhancements we've undertaken, and we do continue to look forward at all of our facilities, securing them, protecting the drinking water for our community, and taking the various measures that we need to. So. Just a kind of a thanks again, City Council, but recognizing this is one of those projects where that kind of work goes. So.
All right. Does anyone else have questions for Steve today? I can't see anybody. So, all right, so we do have a recommended action before us. Place the Small Works contract for the Palermo Security Fence Replacement Project with West Coast Fence Pros LLC on the August 2024 City Council consent calendar with the recommendation to approve and authorize the mayor to sign. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
A second?
I second.
All right, those in favor say aye.
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 All right, thank you, Steve. Appreciate
Thank
the
you very
presentation.
much. Have a good morning.
Thanks. All right. Now we have the Urban and Community Forest Grant Acceptance Agreement with River Network. Good morning, Alyssa.
Good morning. Can you all see my screen?
Yeah.
Perfect. Good morning. As Chair Swarthout just said, this is a short presentation. I'll try to be brief as well on the Urban and Community Forestry Grant Acceptance Agreement. So something that I want to make sure is top of mind when talking about this particular grant opportunity. We are limited to applying the grant funding in the orange area of this map. So I'll go through all of the different tasks associated with this project, but I just wanted to make it clear that the funding from this grant is limited to this designated EPA Inflation Reduction Act disadvantaged communities map that it was developed by the federal government. We may believe that the orange areas are disadvantaged communities in Tumwater, or we may not, but this is the data set that we are permitted to use to kind of delineate where the grant funding can be applied or not. So there are 5 project milestones for this particular grant award, and I'll go into detail about all of them. So I don't need to read them all to you right now. The first one is air temperature data loggers. We would be using available data to identify the low canopy and most extreme heat impacted areas of that orange area of the city, the DAC or disadvantaged communities, and install at least 6 air temperature data loggers in these locations. And the map on the right-hand side of the slide is some available data on urban heat islands within the city, going from extreme to moderate. And you can see that there is actually quite a bit of overlap between that orange area of the map that I showed you before and the orange area of this map for the urban heat islands. We'll be tracking qualitative or quantitative air temperature data, and we have goals to reduce the air temperature in those areas and to install these air temperature data loggers by the end of 2024 if the grant agreement is approved. Milestone number 2, this is the most exciting for me. It would be hiring a full-time urban forester who would spend at least 50% of their time working towards equitable distribution of urban and community forest resources to the and benefits to the DACs or disadvantaged communities in Tumwater, so that orange area again. At the end of this presentation, I'll talk about a city match for the other 50% of this urban forester's time that would allow them to work in the other areas of the city. So some metrics that we'll be tracking for the full-time urban forester is the number of permit landscaping plan and development applications that they review, the number of trees planted in the disadvantaged communities, and the number of trees assessed in the disadvantaged communities. And I'll get into that a little bit more. Our goal is to hire them by March 30th, 2025, so soon. Milestone 3 is a canopy equity program. So this would be developing and launching a free tree establishment program to expand the community and urban forest in the disadvantaged communities in Tumwater, both on city-owned property and on private property. So this would be reaching out to those residents of the disadvantaged communities in Tumwater, encouraging them to come attend a workshop so that they can learn about proper tree care, and then giving them not only trees, but trees, compost, mulch, and watering bags, a number of different materials that will help the tree get established and be healthy. We'll be tracking the number of trees distributed. We have a goal for 250. We may do more than that, but I wanted to make sure that we were satisfying grant requirements. And the goal for that is to launch by March 30th, 2026. Milestone 4 is to develop and launch a program in which residents of the disadvantaged community in Tumwater can request that the city urban forester provide a tree health assessment on their property free of charge. A lot of homeowners remove trees because they're simply scared of them and may or may not have the funding available to them to get an arborist to come out and properly assess the tree health. So this is an incentive to hopefully preserve some of the trees that are existing in the city. as opposed to the easier incentive of giving people new trees to plant and hope for the best. This is to preserve those existing trees and using the staff expertise that we would now have on hand to provide that for residents of the disadvantaged communities. We would be tracking the number of tree health assessments requested and provided with the goal of 50 tree health assessments and to launch that program also by March 20th, 2026. The fifth milestone, the last one, is to develop a street tree trimming grant. And this is in response to a lot of feedback that we were hearing when we were going through the tree code revisions since 2022 with the public. A lot of people were concerned that the street trees are the responsibility of the adjacent property owner, but not everyone can always afford to maintain those trees properly. So this would be a program to kind of a small grant for residents of the disadvantaged communities to apply for an in-kind contracted service. So the city would contract with an arborist, an outside arborist, to come and trim those street trees that are on the properties adjacent to those who are applying for that. We would prioritize those disadvantaged community residents that are low or moderate income that can't afford to do the proper tree maintenance, street trees in disadvantaged communities that are causing conflicts, like the limbs are too low and people are banging their heads on it, or trees in disadvantaged communities that have been assessed by the city urban forester and found to need this maintenance. This street tree trimming grant is just for trimming. It does not include sidewalk repair costs. It's just tree trimming to make sure that we maintain the height and width to make sure that pedestrians and vehicles like our street sweeper can do the work and the enjoyment of the community that they need to.
Alyssa, I have
Yes.
a question for you. So, great program. My question is, how do you plan to get this message out there to let these homeowners know that, you know, we have this? What's the communication plan?
Yes, so we have funding in the grant that's kind of wrapped up into the budget for postcards regularly, to door hanging or even door knocking in those areas of the map that we're allowed to work, so that we can reach out to them and let them know that these programs are available specifically to them. That's on an annual basis, and the urban forester, when they're hired, will be working with our communications team to do additional communications and to make sure that people know that this is available, exactly what the process is. The process for all of these we still need to develop. I'm sure we'll be working with the city attorney since some of these are working on, I guess they're not technically private property, they're in our right of way, but things of that nature. So we will have 3 years to figure out how to best get the word out, but we have some good ideas for now.
Okay, thank you.
The metrics for the street tree trimming grants are the number of applications received and the number of trees trimmed. I think the grant budget allocated to this is something like $80,000 to do the trimming. So as I mentioned before, the forester position is 50% funded by the grant, and all of the incentives are 100% funded by the grant because they're focused in that disadvantaged community map area. So in the budget for 2025 and 2026, and then for 2027, since this grant goes until 2027, staff will be including funding requests in the budget up to $61,503 for each year for the remaining 50% of the salary and benefits for the urban forester. And my recommended action for the Public Works Committee today is to place the subaward agreement with the River Network for the City of Tumwater Urban Forestry Capacity and Equity Project on the city consent calendar, technically for August 20th, with a recommendation to approve and authorize the mayor to sign. And I will take any additional questions that you might have now.
The only question I have is whether folks like Joan would appreciate this being on the regular calendar instead of consent because of how exciting it is. But I think consent is fine. But that's my only comment, is that I'm really excited about the work and the opportunity.
I agree. So yeah, I guess
we could keep it on consent, and then if Joan wants to move it to regular,
okay,
just so that we could publicly sort of have a public airing, then that's her prerogative if she chooses to. I just know she'll be excited about it. progress.
She will, and I think the community would probably be, as far as that we're moving forward with our plan as well. So I think it shows that. Go ahead, Angela. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
Right. I agree with Michael because this is exciting news. And if we can just get it out there in front of everyone, prior, so Joan would be excited. I think we'd all be excited. So I recommend put it on the regular.
On consideration.
On consideration, yes.
Okay, Alyssa?
I would be happy to give this presentation to the full city council on August 20th.
Okay, super. You gotta celebrate the good, celebrate trees. All right, so we do have a recommended action before us to place the sub-award agreement with the River Network for the City of Tumwater Urban Forestry Capacity and Equity Project on the City Council consideration calendar with the we don't have to do the approval part. Well, with the recommendation to approve.
Yeah, recommendation to approve.
Yeah, we do need to put that on there. Okay, with the recommendation to approve and authorize the mayor. And we are aiming for the August 20th, 2024 city council meeting.
I'd like to
So
make a
moved.
motion.
Oh, I'll second Angela's motion.
Okay. All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alyssa. All right, and now we have the Small Works contract with Construction Inc. for the Crosby House Foundation repair. And good morning, Chuck.
Good morning. I don't normally come to this committee and I see everyone had a beautiful presentation and a little PowerPoint going and all this stuff. I didn't do that, so you just get to and hear about this project. Small Works project, something we've been working on actually for several years. 3 or 4 years ago, we did a structural analysis with Sargent Engineering on the Crosby House, and just a little reminder about the Crosby House. It is the oldest house in Tumwater, built in 1865 by either Clanrick or Nathaniel Crosby. We're not really sure which one. And it has survived, earthquakes, the construction of the freeway, a lot of things, but it is a very old house. And if you've ever worked on old houses, this is the epitome of trying to keep a house together. So the house continues to settle. It's built on unstable soils. The vibration from continuous traffic on I-5 doesn't help us at this house. And we've done some work on the foundation. I remember about 10 years ago, we put a new perimeter foundation on it. We took out logs and other things that had been used to hold the house up. So the outside is fairly stable, but underneath the house, we have rotten piers, posts, and rotten joists in the floor system. So this project with Construction Inc. is to go in and clear out the crawl space. So there'll be some removal of soils under the house, remove the failing and rotten floor joists. Not all of them are in that situation, but many of them are. New posts, new piers, new joists, and really just putting a new system underneath to hold the house and keep it stable. Our intent in fixing the house isn't to change the whole shape, the whole angle and shape, the way the house sits and make it exactly level. It's to lock it in place at the angle that it is now. It does slope slightly from front to back, but trying to fix that and make it perfect at this point would cause more damage and be far more expensive than if we can just get it to stop moving and keep it in place. So contractor comes in, digs out the house, removing failed portions of the foundation, installing new foundation, new vapor barrier, and cleaning out underneath the house. $106,000. The Daughters of the Pioneer, who inhabit the house for us and take care of it and provide tours there. They've been a part of this process and are fully supportive of this happening. And what this will do is it'll enable us to go in and do some repairs in the house that we haven't been able to do for several years. I don't know if any of you have been in there recently, but particularly in the upstairs area, as the house has moved, shifted, settled, we have cracks in some of the plaster. We have tears in some of the wallpaper. once we can get the house solidified, then we can go back in and make those repairs. And really take care of, you know, a great asset for the city and our oldest house that has a lot of stories about the beginning and the pioneers in Tumwater. So with that, I'd be happy to take questions, and I'm looking for a recommendation to approve this and authorize the mayor to sign it and have it be on the consent calendar on August 20th.
All right. Do we have questions for Chuck? Michael? No? Okay.
No.
Chuck, that's the White House, right? That stands alone. It's not the one that they tried to burn down. It's the white one.
It's across the street from Master's house.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And I didn't know that was open from time to time. That's interesting.
Yeah, the Daughters, you know, in the agreement that the city had in acquiring that house from the Daughters of the Pioneer, we allow them to stay in the house and inhabit it, and they use it as their meeting spot. And then consideration of that, we have certain weekends mostly throughout the summer, that is open for public tours.
People inhabit it? People don't live there though.
No, they just have meetings.
Their
Okay.
meetings.
Unless you like really want to get into the Pioneer thing, like making your own butter and stuff.
Try not to fall through the floor. So, yeah. All right, we do have a recommended action before us to recommend the contract with Construction Inc. for the Crosby House Foundation repair in the amount of $106,000 be placed on the August 20th, 2024 consent calendar with the recommendation to approve and authorize the mayor to sign.
So moved.
And I second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you, Chuck.
Thank you very much.
All right, it looks like we have now come to the end of our agenda. Do we have anything else for the good of the order, anyone? No? Okay, all right. Then with that, I will call the Thursday, July 18th, 2024 Public Works Committee meeting adjourned, and have a lovely day out there, you guys.
Thank you. See you guys.
Bye.